Teamwork isn't just nice to have in business, it's the undisputed competitive advantage. When your team members work as a unified force, your whole operation benefits through higher productivity, thriving creativity, and unstoppable momentum. Welcome to the Impactful Teamwork Podcast, where we share with you strategies and tactics to help you develop game-changing teams so that you and your business can make a real difference in the world.
Are all teams the same? That is really going to be the topic that we are discussing this week on Impactful Teamwork. So my name's Julia Felton and I'm going to be your host and guide while we really unpack this whole notion of what is a team and the fact that not all teams are the same. And I'm going to draw on some information from the book that we were discussing last week, Teams That Work, the 7 Drivers of Team Effectiveness, because I think this is a really fascinating subject. On this podcast now, we've been talking for, I think this is episode 60 today, of all the ways to create high-performing teams. But I think it's really important for us to go back and really think about what is a team and the differences that happen within teams. And let's just start with an example here of 2 different types of teams. And at one end of the spectrum, you've got something like a senior leadership team. And a senior leadership team obviously runs the business. They've got a very, very holistic view of what's going on within the business. They come together to establish the strategic direction of the company, allocate resources, assess progress, and generally kind of orchestrate what's happening within the business. So often those team members don't work together on a day-to-day basis, and they don't always have to rely on one another to perform their jobs on a daily basis, because most members of senior leadership teams represent a different function within the business unit. And let's contrast with something like a manufacturing team that works together every single day in well-defined roles to ensure adequate production, quality, and safety levels for their shift. They pretty much work shoulder to shoulder to make sure everything happens. So I really wanted to unpack today, what are the factors that drive team effectiveness within these 2 different teams? Because there are some factors that are similar and some that are different within the teams. And these things show up in different ways. And there's 5 particular areas that we're going to delve into, which is reliance, membership stability, task consistency, proximity, and similarity. So there are 5 ways that the teams need to work together, but how they work together is very, very different. And if we look back to the drivers of team effectiveness that we briefly touched on at the end of episode 59, obviously every single team needs great communication. The drivers of that successful communication are quite different. So for a senior leadership team, they're going to be making collective decisions. And it's really, really important when they are sharing the message out to the team that everyone is really consistent and on the same page and understands exactly what the message is, because there is nothing more frustrating for team members when they get conflicting information from the senior leadership team, and that creates friction within the business. And in the worst scenarios, it kind of creates a them and us problems arising, and it can result in some polarization within the business. So that's the problem when we don't have a generally unified message going on. And sort of if you contrast that within the manufacturing team, where perhaps there's less need to communicate a unified message, because people are working together so closely on a day-to-day basis. So everyone tends to be pretty clear about what's going on because of this proximity of everyone working closely together. They're communicating things that are more kind of transactional. Who's on the next shift? What's going to be happening? Problems with their equipment. And then they have some limited, perhaps, external communication to other parties, other teams, other divisions within the organization. So communication is important for both of these teams. It's just in different ways. And this is because teams are not all the same. So when we're thinking about teams and the distinction between teams, and I mentioned these earlier on, this reliance, this membership stability, task consistency, proximity, and similarity. I really think that we need to think this as a sliding scale. And as I'm talking about these concepts, I would really encourage you to think about, where does your team sit on this sliding scale? Say, for example, at one end of reliance, most work is performed independently, versus at the other end of the scale, team members consistently rely on or need to coordinate with each other. So they become fully interdependent. So different ways that we can look at this. So I think it's probably true to say, if we look on this reliance continuum, which goes, as I said, from independent to interdependent, if there is no interdependencies, then we're probably not looking at a team. We're probably looking at a group of individuals. But the team can range from fairly independent to highly interdependent. So when interdependence is low, team members can perhaps help each other prepare and cheer for one another. But when they're actually doing their work, they're actually doing it independently. And other team members are often not able to help them because what they're doing is very specific. Individuals don't have that clarity, that visibility of what their colleagues are doing. So that's an example of a team with low interdependence. And then as you move along the scale, right, we move from some team members who have got to start coordinating with other team members to make things happen. So they've got to rely on one another at certain points to get things done. And then at the far right-hand side of the continuum are the teams that are highly interdependent. And these are probably teams that work together quite frequently, and they really rely on each other for team and personal success. And, you know, we often talk here on the podcast about business is a team sport. And, you know, generally that is what I believe. I believe that actually for everyone within the business to be successful, all the different elements need to work together. They need to be interconnected and interdependent. But that's not to say that there aren't a few roles or activities that go on within the team that aren't more independent. So perhaps a good way to illustrate this is if we look at a sporting analogy. Because maybe sports that are low reliance would be things perhaps like wrestling or gymnastics or swimming, when pretty much it's the team member getting on and doing the activity themselves. Something with medium independence is things like cricket or a relay race, for example. Everyone runs their own section of the relay race, but there is some interdependence going on as they change batons in that relay race. And at the high end, we've got sports such as football, rugby, where everyone works together. So, as I said, at one end, we've got people kind of doing things on their own. And that's how they get the results, right? People work by themselves. I mean, golf is another example of an individual sport, really, because it is the golfer themselves that is making everything happen. But the reason I often say that business is a team sport is because even though golf is an independent sport, that golfer will have had a team of people supporting them in order to get their success. So think about somebody like Rory McIlroy, you know, an incredible golfer, just won another accolade of awards. Rory McIlroy, while on the field of play, he is there by himself effectively. His success is fueled by all of his coaches and his caddies and other people around him that makes that happen. And in the medium reliance area, as I said, we've got things like a relay race. And we talked about this actually on one of the previous podcasts when we were unpacking what happened at the Paris Olympics, actually. And we see this where you've got a group of amazing individual runners. And the US is a great example of this, a group of amazing runners. But in 2008, they actually dropped the baton on the changeovers. So individually, everyone is independent, but collectively, there is some interdependence because they've got to hand the baton to each other to get through the race. And then high interdependence would be something like football, rugby, where everybody in the team works together. And, I think of something like rugby in particular, where you've got to have the 7 people in the scrum all operating together. You can't have one scrum member trying to do something different to everyone else because it doesn't work. They need that cohesion. They need to work together as a unified scrum. So high interdependence within something like a rugby team. So why should we care about this reliance continuum as leaders? I think the reason that we need to really think about it comes from the research. We found that scientific research shows that there are different requirements for a low reliant team versus a high reliant team. Because teams that have low reliance, the team members really don't need to have strong team dynamics. They need to be civil to each other. They need to be able to get on with each other. They need to not create any challenges, for example, in a sales team for their colleagues by upsetting any customers that could have a ripple impact in the business. But at the other end of the spectrum, where we've got team members that must really heavily rely on each other, then I think the teams need to have a much stronger level of cohesion. They need to be a lot more civil. They need to be able to pass the baton to each other. I think there needs to be a greater understanding of each other's strengths and weaknesses and how each other operates in order to get this fully high performing team where everyone works together. So the reflection question here is, when you think about your team, to what extent can team members complete their work independently versus interdependently? Because I think that can make a really big difference to us as leaders in how we need to lead and show up for the team. So the second area I'd like to look at is membership stability. So there's a continuum here as well, from stable to dynamic. And that composition can change. And I think as leaders, it's good for us to understand how frequently it changes and how significantly. So at low levels of membership stability, you've got very, very dynamic teams where people constantly leave the team. And, that can be actually quite disruptive. And people can be leaving the team through promotion. Maybe we need to actually cancel them out of the team. It could be a number of different reasons why the team is very dynamic. It might be that the type of work that we're doing requires us to have very, very dynamic teams that keep changing and we bring different people in. And at the other end of the continuum, we've got team members remain stable. And we've got a lot of consistency with the team and everyone knows everybody. And I know for myself that I often end up working in teams that are pretty dynamic, actually. People don't stay in the job for very long. And that's because often some of the roles that I've been doing and where I've been leading teams more recently been working with younger Gen Z and millennials, and often it's a function of the fact that they're doing some temporary work, in a summer holiday. So the team that you've got one week isn't necessarily the team you've got the next week, because these people are more freelancers and they're coming in and out. So this membership stability can also have quite a big impact on what the team is. We only have to think about an airline, for example. It keeps bringing together different people on the shift pattern, right? One particular flight, you'll be working with, the pilot might have a co-pilot A, and on a different flight, they have co-pilot B. The cabin crew keep changing. Within the team, or within the flight, should I say, the team is very stable, but between flights, the team is very dynamic because it keeps changing. So we sometimes refer to these as flash teams because they have a very, very short cycle of being together. And it's important that we care about membership stability because cognition is one of the 7 drivers of a highly effective team. And cognition refers to the extent to which the team members possess a common understanding or a shared mental model about key factors such as roles, priorities, and individual team members' expertise. And so when team membership is dynamic, it's more difficult to build and sustain and share these mental models. So if you're leading a team with a rapidly rotating membership or one with a short lifespan, there are certain actions you may need to take that are different from those when you have and you're leading a stable, ongoing team. So the reflection here is, where does your team fall along the continuum of membership stability? Is it highly stable, fairly stable, somewhat dynamic, highly dynamic? What percentage of your team members were on your team 6 months ago are still there? And do you think that they will still be there in a further 6 months' time? The third dynamic we want to look about is task consistency. And this is when we go from consistent tasks to unpredictable tasks. So the question we're asking here is, how stable and predictable are the team's work requirements? Does the team perform the same tasks on a consistent basis, or can they establish and rely on stable routines? How frequently and dramatically do work requirements and expectations change? And can they anticipate forthcoming needs? So why should we care about this consistency? Well, when work requirements are consistent, team members have the chance to perform key tasks repeatedly, and that provides these opportunities to learn from experimentation. And, we all know the importance of experimentation within the workplace. When teams get to try something, they find out it doesn't work, and they take away the learning and do something different. But many teams actually work in environments where the task requirements change, either gradually or rapidly. And when task requirements evolve slowly over time, the team has to make adjustments. But they can typically do that in a pretty orderly and planned way. That contrasts with teams that work in this rapidly changing environment where they're constantly having to morph and pivot and do things differently. Expectations can change unpredictably. So teams have to learn the importance of being agile and flexible, which means then sometimes the type of team members we need in these dynamic teams is quite different. We need team members that are able to pivot and are able to be adaptable. We know that not all team members are. Some team members really, really thrive on the stability that they have. So important that we understand about our team members and the type of environment that they want to work in. So the reflective thought here is, would you describe your work requirements as fairly consistent, evolutionary over time? Do they shift regularly? Are they highly predictable? Or does the team perform similar tasks over time? Or is it more dynamic? The fourth area that we just need to consider when we're thinking about different types of teams is what we call the proximity continuum. So this is moving from co-located to geographically dispersed. And obviously, this is something that many companies have experienced quite radically since the pandemic, where we went from a point of being generally co-located to being geographically dispersed as everyone had to work from home. And I think we've seen some really shifting dynamics with this, because I think when the team is co-located, then it does make communication easier. It does make learning easier. I often talk about one of my concerns right now is that with so many people geographically disparate and working from home, one of the things that I really benefited from when I first started my corporate career was this learning by osmosis. This learning that happened when I was in a workplace and I overheard conversations that other people had. And there was so much value in that. It was never on my induction plan. These were things I needed to learn, but it's how I got rapidly up to speed with what was happening in the business, was overhearing other people having conversations, how they did it, how they spoke to clients, how other teams solved problems, that really made that very, very powerful. And of course, with so many people now working in a remote environment, we've lost that kind of benefit. So I think it's really important that as leaders, we think about this power of proximity and how important it is. And of course, we need to weigh that up against creating a workplace culture that responds to people's different needs and requirements. I was recently talking to a client, and their company has literally overnight changed the policy from one where there was quite a flexible hybrid mode of work to one where everybody has to be in the office by 8 o'clock every single day. And that's really caused a lot of challenges for team members. So there is a very, very finite balance we need to make here. So why should we care about proximity? We know that team dynamics are influenced by distance. And, when you don't have this learning by osmosis, or you don't have your boss or a colleague working alongside you, often we can lose some of that coaching mentality that's available in the workplace. We're not getting feedback on what we're doing, so we're not actually sure how we're progressing. So what does that mean? It often means that we need a different type of leadership when we've got all of our team members working remotely. And we've also got to spend a lot of time consciously thinking about how do we connect and build relationships with people that we don't see very regularly. And we don't ever have that kind of banter and chat with, because typically we're just jumping on a Teams or a Zoom call with them to discuss something work related. So how do we build in time consciously within the week to have some social interaction with the person? So the thought for reflection is, where along the proximity continuum does your team fall? Are you all working in the same location? Are you slightly dispersed? Are you largely or fully dispersed? And the final area that I think we need to look at when we're thinking about how the teams operate is what we call the similarity continuum. So we're going from common to unique expertise or perspectives. So the question we're really asking here is, to what extent does the team consist of individuals who possess similar expertise? And we can definitely have teams where everyone has quite similar expertise, similar educational backgrounds, maybe similar levels of skills. And it might be when they're performing a function where those expertise required are quite similar and quite homogeneous. An example of that, I guess, could possibly be the accounting firm that I use. All the people are quite similar. They're all numbers driven. They all operate in a similar manner.
And we want to contrast that with teams that are specifically designed to include people with diverse expertise, cross-functional teams, where people are bringing different expertise from different fields. And I'm a massive proponent, actually, of cross-functional teams, not just from an expertise, but from the different perspectives that we get from different people. I think this can unlock a lot of innovation within the organization because people see things through a different lens. And that can be incredibly valuable, because one of the things that can happen is when the team is very homogeneous, we can't see our blind spots, we can't see opportunities that are out there. But when we bring a group of people together with very, very diverse perspectives, all of a sudden, some of the obstacles that we saw out there become unlocked because somebody is viewing those obstacles through a different lens. So one of the advantages, however, of having people being quite similar is that we can share a common language, and that can have really positive implications for the team dynamics, because everyone knows what's expected of them. Whereas when we have people with very, very different perspectives, then sometimes we don't have that finality of language. And this is why I'm a big proponent of partnering and using something like the GC index within building teams, because it enables us to have diverse individuals within the team, everyone having this unique perspective, but we have a common language to understand what everyone is talking about. And that absolutely propels team performance and increases productivity and profitability, and actually makes the team a much more engaging place to work and much more fulfilling for the team members. So your thought there is, where does your team fall along this similarity continuum? Is the team quite homogeneous, somewhat diverse, or highly diverse? I'd love you to reflect on these thoughts, on this continuum of where your team falls in terms of reliance, membership stability, task consistency, proximity, and similarity. And think about, what does that mean for how you need to lead and manage the team? Because it will require slightly different leadership skills for you. So these are really 5 important team distinctions that I wanted to share with you today. And I've just mentioned one of the tools I love to use to help me unpack and understand some of the areas of these team distinctions is partnering with the GC index. And one of the pillars of the unbridled teamship roadmap is what we call Know the Herd, which is all about how do we get to find out more about our other team members. And I will be running a 20-minute teamship teaching on the 5th of June. So I'd highly encourage you to sign up for that. You'll find a link on our website, businesshorsepower.com. And if you're really not sure where to focus first in developing your team and creating a high performance, highly effective team, I'd highly encourage you to go and take our quiz on how to turbocharge your team. And you can take the quiz at businesshorsepower.com/quiz. And when you've taken that, then I'd be happy to have a turbocharge your team audit conversation with you to help you get some ideas about the next most effective actions you can get to create your high performing team. So I really hope that you found this episode interesting and that you've now got some clarity around the 5 important team distinctions that you really need to think about within your business, and how they all work on a continuum, and how your business can be at different places in each of these 5 different distinctions. So until next week, have an amazing time, and I look forward to speaking to you soon. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to the Impactful Teamwork Podcast. Please stay tuned for future episodes, and do subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating on your favorite platform. Recommendations are essential for attracting new listeners. Please follow us on social media at Julia Felton and at Business Horsepower. And if there are any topics you'd like us to cover on future episodes, please do let me know. Remember, you and your team are always making an impact. What impact will you make today?